Okay, I think the way to begin is to understand the key concept of a scapegoat. When governments and systems find themselves in trouble, as American capitalism now does, it needs to confront the basic problems which it has a horror of doing. And so the cheap politicians who rise to the surface, a little bit like grease in a stagnant pond, they're the ones who decide to make a political career out of deflecting the upset, the honest and justified upset of people in a declining economy by focusing it on folks who really have very little to do with it, but who can plausibly be blamed for it. You know, these days, as we watch the horror in Gaza, we are often reminded of the Germans making scapegoats out of Jews, out of homosexuals, out of all the people they found to blame for Germany's problems. And we find it over and over again in history, and that's what it is now with immigrants. And let me try to get it across as an economist. The immigrants who come here, like all the rest of us, have to go to work. There's no other way to sustain your life and your family in a decent way. And the vast majority of them, as every study shows, go to work. They go and they get a job. Now let's look at that. They work Monday to Friday like everybody else, and they get paid on Friday, unless their employer stiffs them, knowing that they can't go to the police to help because they don't have the documents. But let's put that aside. Let's assume they get paid. Here's what we know. The money they get paid as a wage, they use for their food, their clothing, their shelter, just like everybody else. But when immigrants work, like everybody else, they also produce more, a surplus. They produce more for their employer than the employer pays them. That's why the employer hires them. The goal of the employer is not to pay the worker. That's a necessary outlay that the employer tries to minimize in order to get what he's in there for, which is that surplus, which is then used, we call it profit in our system, which is used by the employer to keep the whole system going. Well, in my judgment, looking at the history, which is all we have to help us understand the new conditions, is how they are illuminated by things that happened in the past. Germany is going to be my model. The German people went through an unbelievable series of crises that really made them, as a nation, hysterical. They were the rising competitor of Britain across the 19th century. You know, the British Empire slowly went down, and the American and the German economies were the great challengers. And in World War I, something happened that no German imagined. They would go to a great war. They had won many wars in the 19th century. That's how Germany went from a disaggregated group of little countries into one big one, was through war led by their great leader, Bismarck. And so they went into World War I expecting that they would win again. They were defeated. No one had prepared them for a defeat. And in their defeat, their empire was taken from them. They had colonies in Asia, in Africa, all taken away by the victorious British, French, and Americans. A few years later, when their government tried to recoup, they had the worst inflation in modern industrial history, wiped out the savings of the entire German middle class, 1923. And then in 1929, the Great Depression hit Germany, and they got smashed again. Lost war, worst inflation, worst depression in history, all in a 15-year period in one little country. It made the Germans crazy. They lost everything. Their people, their savings, their economy, their future. And so they were primed for someone who said, I know who's at fault. These are the bad people, these Jewish people, these homosexual people. Let's kill them, which eventually they did en masse. And the Germans now look back and ask themselves, because they're honest in Germany now, many of them, what went wrong? How did we become so crazy? It's a question that Israelis will be asking themselves years from now about what they have been doing in Gaza, and we all know it. So the question really is, what happened here? Why are we behaving in these ways? And the answer is the American empire, the self-image of the rising exceptional power that God loves more than he loves anybody else, is dying. We're not the world's leading economy. We're not the world's leading power. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost it in Afghanistan. We're losing it in Ukraine. It's too much. And a big part of the country has become hysterical, looking for something. And so they pick a president who is different from everybody else because he says really cuckoo stuff. You know, if you read the early speeches of Adolf Hitler, that was cuckoo stuff then. He says cuckoo stuff too. And now he's doing cuckoo stuff. Yes, he's deporting all these people with a theater. Let me give you an idea of a cost of all of this that nobody understands. I spoke to a New York City public school teacher recently. She's new on the job. And she said to me, my biggest problem is my classroom is empty. I said, what are you talking about? She says, every day it's empty. I said, aren't the school authorities doing something about it? No, too many classes are empty. Why are they empty? Everybody's afraid of ICE, she explained to me. The children don't want to go to school because they're not sure that ICE won't grab them. The parents don't want them to go to school because they fear they'll never see them again. You have a level of what? The end of all public education for millions of people. And we're not going to deport all of them. The numbers that they give, they're as reliable as all the other numbers Mr. Trump's government gives us. No one trusts them anymore. So they'll give us all the numbers they need to pretend that what they're doing makes sense. Hitler had good numbers too. It is a catastrophe. It has to be seen by the American people for what it is. Desperation. These are desperate acts. And trying to impugn the entire federal bench of Maryland is a desperate act. Now, it may be that there are enough desperados in the Supreme Court to let him get away with it. And then we will see where this desperation leads. It'll be the end of the so-called checks and balances. The judiciary won't be able to offset the executive, because that's what he's doing. The legislative will be unable to do it. And you'll have the dictatorship that he's aiming for and that he talks about and that he admires. And that's an act of desperation, because if you can't hold the society together around the parliamentary system that governed this country throughout its history, then what we're watching is the desperate effort to hold it together by force, by putting troops in the cities. Let me tell your audience, in case they don't do what I do, which is survey the foreign press almost every day. The image of troops in your capital city being excused on the grounds that you can't walk in the city, the crime is you are advertising an out-of-control society. That's the price of making it look reasonable to deploy the troops. And most of the rest of the world understands not the details. They understand that an economy they thought was the emblem of stability, reasonableness, secure power isn't that anymore. And you know what that's going to hurt us with? The rich are going to leave this country. Not because our taxes go up. They don't do that. They don't leave because of that, because they have to pay taxes wherever they go. You know when they leave? When the system is falling apart and they don't want to go down with it. So it's up to us, because we will go down with it if this stuff doesn't stop. Yes, it is a global phenomenon, but let's be careful. It's that part of the globe called Western Europe, North America, and Japan. Because if you look at the economies of India and China, these are expanding economies, growing economies. They are inheriting the mantle of dynamic capitalism, and they're enjoying every minute of it. They're the ascending power. That's what Americans don't want to look at. They think that by smashing a few million of the poorest people from Central and South America, they're doing something. They're not. As I tried to show, they're actually diminishing their own economic potential. Look at this crazy government, and it's the same in Germany. I'll get to that in a moment. We're dismantling our scientific apparatus. We're dismantling our research in our universities. We're dismantling. This is crazy. This is not a way to succeed in a growing world economy. No wonder the Chinese are outmaneuvering us in high tech. They're going to be outmaneuvering us in everything else pretty soon, if they haven't already done so. And everybody sees it. There's no mystery here. The Europeans lost their empire already before. We're losing ours now. We had an informal one. They actually took over all those countries, but they lost theirs. We're losing ours. The German welfare state remark by Mr. Merz is very important, as you point out. Let me help. Modern welfare state is an invention of the Germans. It was done by Bismarck in the 1870s. And Bismarck knew what he was doing and explained. The most important phenomena in Germany in the second half of the 19th century was the rise of the Socialist Party. It became the number 2 party in Germany by the end of the century. No surprise, Karl Marx was a German, and his was the inspiration that developed that party as a Marxist political party. And Bismarck, who was a nobility of Germany, went to the fellow nobles and he said, we have to come to terms. If we don't, this movement will displace us. And the deal they made was what we now call the welfare state. We'll keep the masses from revolting against our rule by giving them better housing, better clothing, better jobs, better transportation, you name it. A social safety net. Franklin Roosevelt rediscovered what Bismarck had done 50 years later. That's the history. And the Germans saying no, here is, let me make it as clear as I know how. Mr. Merz making that statement, he may not understand it, not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but here's what he's doing. He's declaring war on the German working class. He's saying we're going to fight wars in Ukraine that the mass of the Germans, as polls show, do not want to do. And we're rebuilding our military because Mr. Trump is making us do that, which the German working class has no interest in. And we're going to pay for helping the Ukrainians and building up the defense that Mr. Trump demands of us because we're his little pets. And you workers are going to pay for it. And they are cutting left and right. Believe me, Mr. Merz is now a member, as you rightly said, of the Christian Democratic Union. They are now scoring number 2 in Germany to a party on the right wing called the Alternative für Deutschland. That's now the number 1 political party, and to his left are 2 anti-capitalist parties, Die Linke and the party of Wagenknecht. Okay, in France, they have designated September 10th, where the same thing is happening, and the working class declared a holiday on September 10th when, quote, the slogan in France, bloquons tout, which in French means we will block everything. No trains, no buses, nothing. No one works, no one travels. We show we are the people, we make the system work. You can't declare war on us, because if we fight back, you lose. We don't have that yet here. But like everything else, it's coming.